Welcome into Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts with CPA and personal financial specialist, Phil Putney. Now let's get rolling with today's show. Back here for another edition of Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts for part 2 of our conversation about universal truths, things that affect all of us and when we get into retirement. And of course, the individual breakdown is going to be different from person to person, but we're going to pick up where we left off. We did the first 5. We're going to talk about the second 5. So if you didn't check out that podcast, you don't have to in order to watch this one or listen to this one, but it might be useful to get that information as well. So go check that out at philstaxhacks.com. That's philstaxhacks.com, or watch it here on YouTube or whatever platform you like using. I say YouTube because Phil and I are looking at each other on video when we're doing this. Yep. What's going on, buddy? You doing all right this week?
Doing good.
Yeah.
Enjoying
you ready to pick up?
The early fall. So
yeah, we are into middle of September, right?
Yep.
It's not.
I guess this is early autumn they call it or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. We're in different spots, right? So it's different. It's in the 80s this week, is all I know, and it feels good. It's not 97 or whatever. It's
and
like
humid.
80.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like 84, which is nice. So I'll take it all day long. But let's get into our next 5, Phil. Let's do 6 through 10 here. We'll wrap it up with this on this conversation. But and we covered some major pieces. Obviously, the first major piece was income, needing income, so on and so forth. So let's go to diversification of essentials for risk management, so on and so forth. Because again, thinking about income, right? So you're going to have to keep up with inflation. We talked a little bit about that. So how you diversify through the years is probably going to change, right? So This is that risk management aspect of it. So if you're 30, you can probably go a little more gung-ho than if you're 60.
Yeah, and I mean, diversification is kind of a funny thing because, I mean, most people think of diversification from an investment standpoint of
only, right.
At a high level, you've got stocks and bonds. I mean, that's your high level of diversification. But then you get into when the stock component, what's the, small, mid, large, U.S., international, all the different sectors you can have in there, and something similar in the bond, short, long-term, corporate, government, whatever you have in the bond section. So, I mean, that's kind of more traditional diversification. Right. But diversification from a retirement standpoint goes way beyond that because, I mean, there's diversification of income. So we talked about having the income. What's your diversification there? You don't want everything coming from one bucket. If Social Security is your only source of income, well, what happens if there is problems with it? Do you want to lose a big portion of your income from that, or a pension? If your pension is your primary source of income, what happens if that pension is underfunded and the company has financial problems? Now what? So having diversification there. Getting into investment diversification, it's having diversification from a risk standpoint. And again, we've talked about it, the now, soon, later buckets. Mm-hmm. So that's how we diversify from an investment standpoint, is first by the time frame of when we're going to need it, knowing how we're going to position risk, and then the last piece of diversification is going to be the tax side of it. Don't have all your eggs in the tax deferred bucket because, I mean, even if taxes don't go up, what does that look like for you? At some point, you're going to hit this wall of taxes potentially.
Yeah, and the steps
there's
too.
A lot of diversification. So
we're thinking about diversification for taxes, Phil. Where people step into things is a lot of times with the steps, right?
Right.
Because they think, oh, okay, well, I'm in 12% or whatever, so I can afford to make some moves or do some things.
Yeah, to fill up that bracket,
you can certainly get moved into the next one. Maybe easier than you realized, right? Some people don't realize how close they are to popping into the next bracket. And now you got to take money out at 22 under the current ones. And that's a big deal.
Yeah, it's a big jump from the 12 to 22, and what happens if either spouse passes, to that surviving spouse? What does that do to their taxes? And we've talked about that a lot on the shows over the years. So
the last couple of weeks we were hitting on some great information just 2 weeks ago on what can happen in some of the things because the brackets get smaller and that number gets cut in half. So certainly important to have a tax or a risk strategy for not just your investments, just your portfolio, but for all the other pieces as well. Yeah. All right. Number 7, emotions is 7 out of 10. Emotions can be our worst enemy. It says investors on our show notes here, but let's be honest, like, we're humans. Emotions just suck for all of us.
Right. I mean, at the end of the day, we all like to think we make rational, logical decisions, but that's not the case.
And a lot of times we don't, and multiple times a day we don't, right?
Yeah, it's emotional decisions we make because that's just who we are. We're an emotional being, right?
Yeah.
Things happen and you react to that thing.
Yeah,
and
you just got
try to justify that logically.
Right. I mean, you could have just gotten some news that ticked you off about something that in the grand scheme of things really probably didn't make a huge difference in your life for the day, but it ticked you off enough to the point that another decision about an hour later comes through that you need to make, and you make the wrong one because you're still stewing from the prior one, right?
Right.
And so it's that Murphy's Law thing sometimes, and it almost seems like the insignificant thing that ticked us off winds up costing us when we make the wrong decision in a more important one that happens later in the day. And from a financial standpoint, it's certainly easy to get kind of overloaded and then think, you know what, just do this because I can't think about it anymore.
I'm stressed out. I'm, too frustrated to, don't understand it, whatever it is. But yeah, so we have to understand ourselves as emotional beings, and you know yourself. So, I mean, if you feel yourself getting to that, hopefully ask your spouse if you don't, because they'll know when you're there. Usually
they'll tell you.
They'll tell you. But yeah, I mean, just realize when you're in that state and maybe don't make the decision then, and that's frankly, as an advisor, one of our bigger roles is helping clients walk through that process. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you're about to make a significant financial decision, call your advisor, please. Don't call them after and say, I did this thing. Call them ahead of time saying, I'm thinking of, what is this going to look like? How does this affect our plan? Are we still okay?
Call Phil up and say, hey, I'm thinking about putting 50% of our retirement account in chinchilla farms.
That's right.
This is going to be the thing. And chinchilla farmers don't send me a bunch of messages saying that it's great business. It may be, but I'm just, using the example of don't take 50% of whatever and just decide you're going to do something you've got no experience in. Right.
Right. Or any, there's 100 different decisions, but just
whatever it might be.
Yeah. If you're making a major financial decision, take it slow, make sure you understand pros and cons of it, ask for advice, run it through your advisor, make sure if you're married, you guys have, both spouses have talked this through. So everyone's on the same page and
Phil, I got a new slogan for you. You said, take it slow, talk to a pro. Right.
Hey, there you go. Yeah,
before you do anything crazy, so that you know.
Yeah, I always tell my clients, look, I'd much rather hear I'm thinking of than I did this thing. It's not to say it's going to be completely wrong and you blew up the plan, but at the end of the day, it's like, do we want to do triage or do we want to help make it less painful and actually work? So
there was a commercial series not long ago with actor Paul Giamatti, who's a fantastic actor, and he's playing a financial advisor. And it's a car commercial, oddly enough, right? I don't know if you saw those or not, but he gets a phone call from his client and he goes, hey, and he goes, what are you doing? He's like, oh, I'm driving in my new car. And he's like, your new car, and so his panic is that and I think he's supposed to be like a really famous guy.
Or something.
Yeah, he's thinking he bought a Lamborghini or something like that. So that winds up being a Volkswagen or whatever it is, and it's like, oh, this is really great, right? But every time I see stuff like that, I always think about
I'm on my new boat.
It's like, how does that affect? And your advisor going, you did what?
You did what? Yeah.
So there's just a quick little pause there. And it's like, oh, you bought something really affordable. Okay. That's great.
Yeah.
So anyway, our emotions are certainly can be our own worst enemy. Let's go to number 8 here, tax implications. So we're going to circle back around to it because as I said with the first podcast last week when we talked about income, they're going to run neck and neck, Phil, for a lot of this, right? Yes. Because we got to have money coming in to live by. We got to pay for food and we got to have the lights on and go out to eat and whatever the case is. But you want to be efficient and effective with your tax strategy and not just like leaving a legacy to like when you're gone, but just how it's affecting things, right? Because your Social Security is going to be, the amount of income you're pulling in, that's going to affect the Social Security. So there's a lot of tax levers that get kind of moved.
Absolutely. And I always tell clients when we're walking through this, and even in the class, I'll draw it out where, you've got the retirement trifecta, so to speak. You've got income. Okay. Everyone's got some kind of income, at least Social Security at a minimum. Everyone has that. Maybe a pension. What are your income sources? And you're going to have assets.
Okay, you got income, you got assets.
Where are your assets positioned? The 3 tax buckets: taxable, tax deferred, tax free. And then you have taxes. And as you move one, it moves the other and changes. So it's the combination of those 3 the intersection of the three of those together, I mean, there's a perfect plan for you. But understand how that works. I mean, if you talked about buying something, right? You're going to buy a boat, a car, whatever it is, and you just go to the bank or go to your investments and pull it all out of an IRA. Well, that's going to be a much different scenario than if you had a Roth IRA, or if it was in a taxable investment. And, so I mean, you just have to understand what is the tax effect of these decisions. And that's why planning is key.
Yeah. And most of us don't
have the strategy to understand this is what it looks like. How do we best minimize it long term? So,
well, I think most of us don't, Phil. Most of us go, taxes are something I got to deal with. So I'm going to make, move X, Y, and Z, and I'll just, whatever the tax implication is, I'll just deal with it. Right.
Yep.
But if we just did a little bit of work with someone, and especially if it's not something that we're keen on, then we might find out that the implications from X, Y, and Z's move is not nearly as painful as it was going to be. I mean, even if you're saving yourself 10% or who knows what the number might be, but that's money you're keeping in retirement, right? So why not?
Yeah, I mean, and again, from a tax standpoint, you're talking about those little moves. We run through a scenario of somebody in a 12% bracket, that has capital gains that year, let's say, and they decide to take an extra $10,000 out of their IRA. Well, if you run the math on that for the right scenario, and a lot of people get caught in this, you can actually pay 50% in taxes. Because you pay 12% on the distribution. That's true, but that extra distribution now causes the 12% tax on 85% of your Social Security. And now the IRA distribution plus the 85% of Social Security added together go into the tax equation and push then potentially the capital gains above the zero threshold to the 15% capital gains rate. So all of a sudden, if you add the math up on that little scenario, it's really bad news if you didn't think this through ahead of time and actually plan this out to understand, hey, I've got Social Security, I've got my taxes. If I do this, this is going to be the true tax cost.
Yeah.
That's one of those, I had no idea, I thought it was
I had no
12%
idea.
bracket. I just, took it out and go get your taxes done that year. And you're going to say, what? I owe what? How did that happen?
I've been doing it on the show this past couple of weeks because my wife's been playing this little game on her phone when she's, waiting on the dogs to dry or something after she's given them a bath. And she has to move these levers and a lever makes another lever move. And it's just a puzzle game, right?
Yeah.
But that's exactly what retirement planning is like in a lot of cases, because it's like, okay, this one's going to move these two that are 3 steps down, but then I need to move this. Okay, you know what I mean? So it's like trying to figure out the right combination. And that's where, again, our topic is universal truths that affect all of us. Taxes clearly going to affect all of us. But how the individual lever gets pulled for each person is going to be different from, again, person to person. So it's really important to have those conversations with your financial professional. So that was number 8.
Yep.
Number 9, retirement doesn't mean complete disengagement from work. 70s, the new 50, 60s, the new 35, whatever it is. But I mean, I think about, I'm 52 next week, Phil, and I look at pictures of my dad at 52. Not even in the same hemisphere, right? Yeah. He looks like an old man. I look, not like an old man, but so. But
you don't look like an old man, so
and so you can be more active, right? So again, it's the work optional conversation, and again, I know that's the new buzzword now is work optional. Yeah. But it's like, if you want to do things, and it doesn't have to be a job that necessarily pays you money. You could call it work just because you're going to the local dog shelter and volunteering your time. But whatever it is, it doesn't mean disengagement if you don't want it to.
Right. Well, that's what I always tell clients. I said retirement isn't quitting. Retirement means you're working on your own terms. To me, I mean that is truly retirement. It means work's optional. Kind of the big phrase now. But it is truly saying I'm financially independent. And I always tell my clients, and this is one of my favorite discussions to have, especially when somebody's thinking, I don't know if this is going to work, or I might have to work a couple more years. And as you run through the math, you say, you know what, you might actually be able to retire today. Actually, if you run the math, it looks okay. In fact, I'm meeting with a client later this afternoon that was her scenario. When she came to me, she was really stressed out thinking, I'd like to retire in a couple of years. I don't know if this is going to work. And as we're working this through, I told her, you actually could retire today if you want. So I said, if you go into work tomorrow and they tick you off, just say, hey, I'm done.
I want to see I really want to see that face. I want to see the face on somebody when you tell them that. Because it's got to be pretty cool.
Oh, yeah. They're like, really? I'm like, yeah, here's the math.
Yeah.
But most people don't really understand.
Do people get taller after that happens? Yeah. After you say that to them, I got all sorts of little fuzz on me. Do they get taller? They kind of raise up and they go, I can retire tomorrow, right? So it's like this imaginary weight comes off, Yep.
Exactly.
That's so cool. That's very cool.
Yeah, and that's my favorite part of the job, really, is working with a client and being able to tell somebody that is cool. Yeah. Because now that stress is off, right? Yeah. I mean, I've had it before where I remember a school teacher once that I've worked with and still work with, but when we were doing her planning, that's her thought. She was thinking a couple of years down the road and we were running the math and it's like, yeah, I mean, you could retire today if you wanted. And she's like, no, I mean, I really enjoy the job. I said, that's fine. Just letting you know, this is where you're at. Yeah. And 6 months later, she called me up and she said, yeah, I'm done.
I'm done.
Great.
I'm out of here.
Let's plan for it. It works. So.
Well, Murphy's Law is always doing something to us, right? So I was making the joke about being an old man and not being as old as my dad. And while we're talking, I got gray hair falling out on my shirt, on my black shirt for those that are watching us. So for the listeners, they're like, what in the world's going on over there? It's, that's right. Murphy's Law is going, I shall get you, right?
You're not old. What are you thinking?
Well, but that's the universal thing, right? Is that something's always going to happen too, right? So if we're talking about universal truth, something is always going to happen that's going to derail things to a degree, right? So having at least a good roadmap or a good strategy helps us kind of get back on, to the straight and narrow, whatever that might be for our individual situation, a little quicker, possibly.
Yeah, have a stress test run on various scenarios because things are going to happen.
Yeah, things are definitely going to happen, right? So let's do the last one. Number 10 on our list, top 10 here, things to think about that are universal truths that can affect us all in retirement, is estate planning is not just for the Rockefellers. It is not for the Vanderbilts. It was a number of years ago, Phil. I think that people were still not even that far ago that people were probably still going, oh, you have a financial advisor? You must be wealthy, right?
That's right.
It's like, no, do you have a guy? No, I don't have a guy. I'm not rich enough. You should get a gal. You should get a guy. You should, something like that, right?
Right.
And that's not the case. It's the same thing with estate planning or even a trust or whatever it is that you might need. You don't have to be mega rich for that, right? Now
absolutely.
There's a lot of reasons to do this.
Yeah, I mean, have a plan to understand it. I mean, the biggest reason, even if you don't have the 13 plus million that you would need to have a quote unquote estate tax issue, right? And that's for one person.
Right.
And that's what most people are thinking of. But the reality is if you have a lot of your money in that middle bucket, that tax deferred bucket, and you pass away, money's still going to be there typically. I mean, it's not all going to be spent through RMDs. And if your kids inherit that, what does that look like for them? And when we're running through this scenario with clients or even a surviving spouse, we talked about that widow's penalty of that increased tax exposure. Yeah. What does it look like for them? I mean, to me, that's more the estate planning side of it too, is understanding, well, the estate tax, that isn't going to hit a very few people, right? That being said, just be careful because that's one of the pieces in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that could come back around to us where that gets lowered.
And that gets lowered. Yeah.
Right. So who knows where that, to be determined, let's say.
Right.
Let's hold out on that. But for most people, the estate tax side of it isn't the reason. It's more number one, income taxes, understanding what that looks like. But then really understanding how do you want this to happen?
There's privacy concerns to take into account. There's control issues to take into account.
You don't want it necessarily be to public and go to probate. It takes time, attorney fees, and it's all public to whoever wants to look it up. Yeah. Control.
Yep. So, you could have multiple marriages. You could have multiple children from multiple marriages. You want to deal some things out in different ways, and you don't want it to be necessarily everybody knows everybody else's business. I mean, there's lots of ways to think about it, right? So,
I mean, if you have one of your kids doesn't handle finances as well as the others, and that, so you want to help protect them. I mean, there's ways to set it up for that, especially if you have kids that are special needs. Yeah. And you're trying to position some money for them, you've got to be very careful. I mean, if they have Medicare, they've got Medicaid even, you don't want to take away some of their benefits that they have because now they inherited a little bit of money.
Well, and I think we should probably
places that come into that. So
we should probably highlight again for those folks who
if you're thinking about doing something, like even just the basics of naming somebody in control of whatever that might be, even with your own family members or whatever, be careful. Really think about the person that you're naming, because I know, again, every time people say, well, my kids won't do this or my family won't do that. I just talked with an advisor earlier today who shared a story about a woman's son. Basically, she gave him all the powers of attorney for things and so on and so forth, which means he had access to her retirement funds, and he bled her dry, his own mother, right? Yeah. And she was still around. It wasn't like she was gone. And then she's like, hey, how come I'm broke? Wait a minute. You hadn't been coming to the meetings and your son had been handling everything, right? So you've got to also there's got to be some personal responsibility in thinking about who you're putting in place and having some protections for yourself.
Yeah. And estate planning too involves, even if you don't need necessarily the trust and all the things that go with that, to me, make sure you've got the medical powers of attorney, the living will. Those are some key documents that are estate planning. Yep. That some of them aren't even financial. The durable power of attorney, that's more financial, but the other ones are vital documents to have in your estate plan that everyone needs. I don't care how much money you have, and beyond that, estate planning isn't just a one-time, I've done it. Right. Look at this every year. Beneficiary designations. I can't stress that enough. Understand who your beneficiaries are on all the accounts. Revisit it on a regular basis to make sure that, the insurance company, the custodian, whoever it is, hasn't messed up maybe, or just that something hasn't changed.
Exactly.
If somebody's passed away or there's a new grandchild born or whatever the case is, it's time to revisit all that to understand, do I need to make positioning changes of those assets, beneficiary designations? So, yes, it's something that you always need to come back and look at on a regular basis.
Well, as you said, it's a universal thing, even if it's just some of the basic pieces that you got to get covered, right? So that was our topic really for the last 2 weeks, was some universal truths that affect us all in retirement, because we're humans, because we're alive, and these things are just going to pop up. So we got to deal with some of them, and then how they work individually. Well, that's the uniqueness of getting a strategy put together with a financial professional that's going to help you with what it is that you need, because your situation is different from your neighbors and so on and so forth. So if you're in and around the Michigan area and you want to talk with Phil, and even if you're not, he's available. So just reach out to him, give him a jingle. If you're checking out the podcast, don't forget to subscribe to us. We'd certainly appreciate that. Just hit the little subscribe button on Apple or Google or Spotify or YouTube. You subscribe on YouTube. I think it's the heart button on the other audio apps.
The other ones,
whichever one kind of floats your boat. Share it with others who might benefit from the podcast. We're on episode 201. So we certainly appreciate you hanging around with us, and hopefully
should have brought the big cake out with all the candles.
Yeah, we probably should have done that. and maybe hopefully you pick up some useful nuggets of information along the way that's been beneficial for you. So again, we appreciate your time as always. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you next time here on Phil's Tax Hacks and other retirement facts.
Phil? Investment advisory services offered through AFS Wealth Management. The content of this program is provided for informational purposes only and is not a solicitation or recommendation of any investment strategy. Investments and/or investment strategies involve risk, including the possible loss of principal. There is no assurance that any investment strategy will achieve its objectives.